thanks a lot for coming along tonight in this wet and windy night. So welcome. James Morrow is here for the first time, and Bruce Wolpe makes a welcome return to the Sydney Institute. He's been here a few times before, so I'll introduce them briefly because they're well known to you. And the topic, of course, is President Donald Trump after 100 days, two views. And it is the 100th day today or yesterday? Today, so there you go. We'll start off with James Morrow. He's a Sky News host and National Affairs Editor for the Daily Telegraph. And Bruce Wolpe is a Senior Fellow at the United States Study Centre in Sydney. And he worked in the past for Julia Gillard and was a congressional staff member for the House Democrats in the United States. His most recent book, it's a new edition of the slightly earlier book, but the new edition is called What Trump's Second Term Means for Australia. So we'll lead off with James Morrow, then we go to Bruce Wolpe, then we go to questions and discussion. Off you go, James.
Thank you so much, Gerard, and it is so great to be here to join all of you lovely folks here at the Sydney Institute for the 100th day-anniversary, I guess we call it, of the Trump administration. So it's great that we've been asked here to do this, I think one of the things that we have to start out by doing is acknowledging the fact that whether you love Donald Trump or hate Donald Trump, there are so many things that we have to acknowledge that he is a historical figure on. I mean, he has achieved in 100 days things that I never once would have thought possible. I mean, think about this, Democrats who once bought Teslas to show how cool they were and are saving the planet. Now look at Elon's EVs as if they were some sort of, I don't know, what do they find really disgusting? A nativity scene on public land or something like that. Meanwhile, around the world, most notably, I think most recently, we've seen in Canada, the left has decided all of a sudden, and this just amazes me, patriotism and nationalism and national pride, that no longer makes you a Nazi if you believe in your country and like to wave your flag and stand up for yourself. Because, hey, it's fine, because they're standing up to Trump. And on the economics front, we have to agree here that on the economics front, some wild things have happened there politically too. Liberals, and I use that in the American Democrat, liberal, progressive sense of the word, liberals have now become libertarians when it comes to free trade and objecting to tariffs, almost to the point where if they keep it up, they'll all be wearing fedoras and growing neckbeards. But let's look at the first 100 days here of Trump. By the numbers, it's absolutely extraordinary, and particularly when you consider what came before. And we will talk a little bit about what came before, because to understand Trump, you need to understand how we got here. So far, by my count, there have been 142 executive orders on everything from DEI to paper straws. And if we can't all come together on paper straws, really, seriously, people. But I note that he has not yet made the old school light bulb the law of the land. Anyway, according to their press office, he's taken 106 questions from the press, but I actually think it's been far more than that, and I think there was probably far more in the last 100 days than Joe Biden took during his entire 4 years as president. They've also noted that there have been 26 American hostages released around the world from places like Russian dungeons. Doge has cut something like $160 billion in spending. Nice, but not enough. And border czar Tom Homan tells us that there have been 139,000 criminal deportations already in 100 days. That is a pretty impressive record. And I think one of the things that we have to say, too, though, is look at Trump in the context of history. Yes, he is a world historical president. In so many ways, he's touched so many third rails. He's gone against so many sort of things that were just the accepted orthodoxy that we say, oh, well, like this guy is completely nuts, he's completely crazy. We haven't seen anything like this before. And of course, all of the people who benefited from the old system are, of course, furious about that, and that's why they're doing so much to oppose him. More about that in a moment. But if you look at the sweep of American presidential history, what we see with Trump is a model of president that is not exactly out of step with what we have seen in the past century, in the past 100 years. Remember that from FDR to Nixon and the Watergate scandal, presidents very often acted in a fairly Caesarian manner, and I mean that in the sort of the Roman sense of the word. Watergate, of course, turned that around, and that was when the bureaucracy sort of fought back and said, no, we're running the show. And so in that sense, it's just simply we're switching back to a mode of president that we have seen before. I mean, and a great example of this, of how the bureaucracy took over, you had successive presidents who tried to cut the bureaucracy. Barack Obama actually made a go of it, and he created the Department of Digital Efficiency or something like that, which became an executive office, which then Trump repurposed into Doge. But the fact is that Obama tried, and he couldn't do it because, of course, that bureaucracy was too big. And Trump has just simply said, well, we're going to take a baseball bat to it. And, I also think about the example of FDR. And, there's all these sorts of examples of, Donald Trump, he's doing all these terrible things to all these foreign criminals at the MS-13, and woe is me, what about their civil rights? But I do remember that in 1942, when a group of German saboteurs were caught in New York and Florida planning to blow up hydroelectric plants and other key loci of American industrial power, but they were eventually ratted out, thankfully. Roosevelt knew exactly what he was not going to do. He told his Attorney General, Francis Biddle, quote, I want one thing clearly understood, Francis. I won't hand them over to you, any United States Marshal armed with a writ of habeas corpus. Understand? This was war. There was no civilian due process for these chaps, and they all met a very quick and highly leaded end. So that is again, we do have plenty of examples of this, and we can debate whether or not what was going on at the southern border was or was not an invasion, but you can see, in many ways it, did look like that duck and quacked a bit like it too. And finally, we also talk about, the economics of the tariffs, and oh my God, what a shock this is. We haven't seen anything like this before. But of course, a few of you might recall that in 1971, Nixon shocked the global system with the ending of the Bretton Woods system, much in the same way that Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, which we'll talk about and which I don't fully agree with, but the point of that is it was another moment in history when the American dollar, as the world's reserve currency, had become out of value, out of whack, out of balance, and that there were urgent changes that needed to be made. And yes, it caused a recession, but then, of course, it also unleashed prosperity and eventually, of course, led to Australia's floating its own dollar, which led to a whole era of reform. But that's another talk for another time. I want to just run through a few things that he's done. And I think that the key thing is that he has provided a much needed shock to the system. The United States could not simply have kept going on the way it was, whether in terms of its border, whether in terms of its relations with China, whether it's in terms of its relations with the rest of the world. Something had to change. Now, let's look at one of the big ones here. And this is the biggie. The border. Now, illegal crossings have basically, for all intents and purposes, that's not a thing. You're not getting the 10,000 a day. You're not getting any of that. But the really interesting thing about this is that not a lot needed to actually be done to change this, which tells me that under the Biden administration, there was never any seriousness about dealing with the border, and in fact, actually what they had allowed to develop is what some people call a crisis by design. So, meanwhile, we have the situation with the deportations, and which I've mentioned numbers on before, and the fascinating thing about this is that the idea of deporting criminals has become such a horrifying thing to the left that we have now seen cases where a judge in, I believe it was Colorado, if I'm remembering right, a judge actually let a accused wife basher who was a second-time sneaker-innerer into the United States. He'd been deported once before. And he had the victims there, and she adjourned the case to help him slip out the back of the court and get out onto the street when she realized that ICE agents were outside looking to pick this fellow up and send him back to his native Central America. Now, she naturally got into trouble for this, and of course, apparently now, this sort of making up the law as you go along is, apparently great heroic sort of thing. Columnists like David French in the New York Times have said this. Okay. But at the same time, they're also saying, oh, well, this is just absolutely fascist. You can't get a judge in trouble for helping a criminal escape. Oh, my God, that's just horrible. Other big things I think that he's done spectacularly well, the whole fight against anti-Semitism, political correctness, wokeness, DEI, mostly at universities, but also throughout the country, has been absolutely fantastic. Now, I think, frankly, he's absolutely right to turn the screws on Harvard. If Harvard wants to be Hillsdale College and not take any federal money, that is their choice. But they have become a $53 billion hedge fund with tax-free status and classrooms and a diploma printing machine attached. So I'm happy to see them, really get taken to the woodshed, particularly because they came in dead last in the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education on the Fire Free Speech Index, dead last. So, I think that's great. I think the Justice Department being turned to go after anti-Semitism and a lot of other sort of things like that is great. And as well, I think the executive order, which wasn't commented on much, but I think it's important, ending the idea that disparate impact is proof of racism, is very important. Now, that's the idea that if a policy, if there's some sort of difference in racial outcomes in something, then that's automatically adjudged to be disparate impact and racist and terrible and so on and so forth, and therefore a violation of civil rights law. Ending that has absolutely been key. And I mean, this is before we even get to the other great things like the executive order requiring federal agencies to recognize two sexes and stop promoting gender ideology, and that flows through to the women's sport, all of this. Now, and letting biological men participate in women's sport. States who resist will lose federal funds. And again, it's like, well, this is good. This is common sense. This is what we voted for. I voted for. I don't know about you. But this was something that even Republican administrations weren't able to touch because it became such a political third rail. Other things, getting rid of the Department of Education, fantastic. That was a waste of time. We didn't need states-run education. DOGE, I think, has been good, but it actually hasn't gone far enough, although one thing that I think has been excellent has been the demolition of the U.S. Agency for International Development, which under the cover of providing foreign aid, and it did do some useful foreign aid things, was basically largely funding protest movements in the United States and abroad, funding NGOs that were driving the vast influx of migrants from the developing world into the first world, not just the United States, but outfits like Catholic Charities that were pouring migrants into Europe as well. Ending all of that has been fantastic. The tariffs are the biggie, of course, that everybody is talking about. Now, I disagree with the strategic approach. I'm generally not a tariffs guy, but again, you do have the point that the issue of China, shall I say it? China, was a huge problem. And you had unbalanced trade, the threat of Chinese dominance and forever debt, selling China debt to get cheap consumer goods. That couldn't go on forever. We know what China has been guilty of: the mercantilism, the IP theft, the spying, the currency manipulation, inflating their own GDP, predatory trade practices. All of this had to end. And the hope is that through some short-term pain, as with the Bretton Woods discussion in 1971 with Nixon, that you can create a better system. China knows also, by the way, that they have a problem too, that they're basically, because their GDP is artificially inflated by all of their mercantilist practices, they are under-consuming, essentially. They're an under-consuming economy. Their economy is very much out of balance, so they know actually that there's a problem. So a lot of the sort of the Sturm und Drang around this, I think, is a little bit confected. And finally, I think we need to look, before I give it to my good friend Bruce, and he's my friend, we have to look at the counterfactual here. Remember, let's not forget, Joe Biden was essentially demented, especially in the last bit of his office. The press lied and lied and lied about it. The White House lied and lied about it. People like me who would go on Sky News and say, hey, look at this. This guy's not all there. They'd say, that's fake news. You're a right-wing agent of disinformation. Well, here we are. And we also know Kamala Harris was unelectable. We knew this because, as we all know now, Josh Shapiro, who I actually rate very highly as a Democrat politician, was canny enough to tank his interview with the Kamala people to keep from being selected as vice president. And that's why they wound up with that great paragon of American masculinity, Tim Walz, to go and get those working class male votes. Remember Tim Walz? Yeah. Woo! And finally, in terms of busting norms, well, Donald Trump is always supposed to be the guy. He's destroying the norms. Oh my God, he's destroying the norms. Except that we think about things like the weaponization of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA against Trump, the Russia hoaxes, the Hunter Biden laptop. Oh no, that's not real. That's really Russia. The letter from the 51 former intelligence agents, the various different ways that they tried to control the press, and so on. Norms were being busted all over the place by the left. Someday we're going to get back to some nice equilibrium of norms, but people who act like they're shocked by things that are going on in this White House, I just say, remember your history and imagine if Trump was doing the things that those guys did. Anyway, with that, thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Bruce.
All I can say is if Kamala Harris had won the election, I would have spoken first. I think I'm doing something that she should have done, which is go on the Joe Rogan show, right? So, James, tonight is really, it's two views of the first 100 days. We're not debating the first 100 days. We're just going to call things as we see them. So when Ann Henderson says, we invite you to the Sydney Institute, you accept the invitation. And so thanks to you, thanks to Gerard for all of this. So my view of Trump at 100 days, he's in command and he's out of control. After 100 days in office, Trump is in command and he is out of control. Several fundamental things have been achieved in 100 days which people didn't think possible. America is no longer the leader of the free world because the world is no longer following America. Trump insisted on Canada's election day that the NATO ally, when he talks about Canada annexing and Greenland, well, we're talking about taking over NATO countries that we're allied with. Anyway, Trump insisted on Canada's election day that the NATO ally should become the 51st state. He posted on Truth Social as people were going to the polls. As we know, Canada emphatically rejected Trump by voting in Prime Minister Carney. Second, Trump has forged a new American imperialism to project U.S. interests and secure strategic assets. He wants to take over the Panama Canal and annex Greenland, as well as Canada, and he has plans for a fantastic resort in Gaza. With every major U.S. industry and trading partner is the target of Trump's tariffs. The third major thing that he achieved within 100 days is that the global trading system that has been in place for 75 years has been crippled, if not destroyed. Fourth, the U.S. economy is on the verge of crashing due to Trump's chaotic management of the trade wars, inflation spikes, and his attacks on the chair of the Federal Reserve. On his inauguration day, last January 20, President Trump declared to the American people, "My fellow citizens, the golden age of America begins right now. It has not arrived." At 100 days in office, Trump's standing is poor. His approval is at 44%, the lowest of all presidents going back to Franklin Roosevelt. But I think we should really start with the data instead of just rhetoric. And polls, you've seen dozens of polls out this week, so I thought I'd go to the best polling organization I know, in James's honor, Fox News, and quote their polls. Fox News polls out 2 days ago. Trump approval 44, disapproval 55. CNN has him at 41, the Washington Post has him at 39. But even at 44, it's lower than any other president going back to Roosevelt's time. On the border, though, as James has been saying, and I agree with it, the border is a very popular issue. And on polling on that issue and what he's doing to control the border and end illegal immigration, 55 approve, 40 disapprove. But then on a series of issues and where people stand in America on it, foreign policy trumps conduct. 40 approve, 54 disapprove. The economy, how's the economy going for you? 38 approve, 56 disapprove. Tariffs, do you support what Trump is saying and doing on tariffs? 33 approve, 58 disapprove. On inflation, how's inflation going? 33 approve, 59 disapprove. And so on all the issues except the border, he's underwater and his approval is underwater. There is one polling number which actually is favorable to him and a degree of vindication. Going into the election, 70% of Americans thought the country was on the wrong track. There's a classic polling question. So you go in the right direction or the wrong track. And going into the election, it was 25 right track, 70 wrong direction. Today, that's going up to 39. Almost 40% of people feel that the country's on a better track. That's Trump's base. They got what they wanted. He was elected, and I'm not surprised by the figure, but it is a degree of political support for what he's doing. So taking all that into account, so that's where it is, and that's the mood as we're seeing it. And overall, as far as how people feel domestically in their households, their income security, and so forth, there's a consumer confidence index that has been in place since 1952, and today it's at the lowest level since 1952. How is Trump doing in office? How he's conducting himself? He's not governing by legislating, but by an unprecedented exercise of executive power. He signed no one has signed fewer bills into law than Trump at this stage of his presidency. He has issued over 140, as James said, executive orders, and they've triggered a tidal wave of new policies to change what the government can and cannot do, especially on equity and diversity issues. They are very powerful instruments. Trump's style of political power is marked by these decrees coupled with complete domination of the airwaves for several hours each day. And I think this is really significant. Trump is on air about 3 or 4 hours a day. Fox News covers it live almost all the time. If you think about it, when he has his cabinet meetings, he has the cabinet around him, and they all say, "You're fantastic, you're our dear leader," and the press is called in, and they witness this. And then after the cabinet gives its report to the president, then the president asks the press in the room any questions, and this goes on for 2 hours. When he has any visitor from overseas, any foreign leader in the Oval Office sitting by the fireplace, they invites the press in and he talks for 45 minutes. Today, he went to Michigan. He spoke for 90 minutes, and the crowd loved it. And I'll get back to that later. It's significant. I mean, Trump is a movement, and he has followers, and it's very serious business, and they are delighted to see him and hear him. Just go to C-SPAN, just call up today's rally in Michigan and look at it. They love being there. They love that he's the president. He's saying what they want to hear. They voted for him because they wanted him to win, and they wanted him to win to do the things that he promised he would do, and they believe he will do that. And so this is very potent political stuff, but it's sort of like going to a Taylor Swift concert. I mean, it just looks fantastic. But his domination of issues by having 140 executive orders which unleash 1,000 policies, plus his domination of the media, people have said it's flooding the zone, it's a fire hose. So much is coming out, you can't grasp all of it, you can't handle all of it, you can't absorb all of it, and so and it has an effect on the Democrats, and I'll get to that. But this is highly effective presidential command. That's why he's in command, and he's executing it all the time, and I think very, very well, as far as what he wants to achieve. So for Trump, it's all streaming all the time. But at the same time, the grand master of the art of the deal is flailing. Trump promised big early success on the world stage, but Trump to date has failed to end the wars in Ukraine, the war in Gaza, a nuclear deal with Iran, or settling any of the 100 plus, maybe 200 trade agreements that he has to make. He said that he would solve Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, in 2,400 hours, he has not solved Ukraine. And I don't see any, and he's getting to a point where he doesn't like where Russia is. He especially doesn't like where Ukraine is. He says, well, I just may leave them alone. And that is, well, we haven't seen the president act that way. Australia has had a very strong case on trade. Australia has a trade deficit with the United States. Trump thinks feels that America's been ripped off for decades by foreign countries, ripped off by other countries selling more than they're buying from the United States. Australia is an exemplary trading partner, and Trump is punishing Australia for being an exemplary trading partner. What he should do, on the other hand, is say, look at Australia. Look what they're doing. They have a trade deficit with us, and that's exactly the way I want it. And as soon as other countries act like Australia acts, then I'll reward them. But no, with Trump, you can never get enough. He always wants more. And he's going to impose more, too. Pharmaceutical tariffs are coming, and that's going to hurt a lot, both the industry and American consumers. Trump, as he executes his plan, is chaotic. He has constant reversals in tactics and rhetoric, sometimes several times a day. I'm going to stop security. I'm going to stop intelligence sharing with Ukraine, and then he turns it back on. I'm going to stop having any weapons to go to them, then he turns it back on. On trade deals, here's my Liberation Day. The trade tariffs are coming into effect. Well, we'll adjust it here, we'll adjust it there. I'll give a 90-day pause. He made a major announcements on changing the rules for automobile parts in the United States today. It'll change again tomorrow. So those are the programs and where he has gone on some pretty basic principles of being a president. At home, together with Elon Musk, he has unleashed Project 2025 as a sledgehammer or a chainsaw into the bureaucracy. There is the wanton, wholesale dismantling of agencies and programs with mass firings, loyalty oaths, and seizure of databases. I think the target is probably to get rid of 10% of the federal workforce. That would be about 300,000 people. I think he's well on his way to doing that, and we will have to see. Trump and Musk have overridden acts of Congress to close down agencies and programs. Congress has the power of the purse. Congress passes bills every year for all government agencies. This is what you're authorized to do, and they appropriate money to do it. And the money has been stopped unilaterally without Congress saying, yes, you can do that. That'll go into the courts, and we will ultimately get a decision on something like that. Trump and Musk have ended the projection of U.S. soft power by terminating foreign aid, and I think it's a little more serious than what James outlined. That includes vaccines, food programs, and other things. And so when there's a disaster in the world, the U.S. is no longer able to respond to it. China's in there providing a lot of aid, and I think China sees benefit in doing that. Back home, on political terms, Trump is exacting vengeance on his enemies, just as he said he would do. I am your retribution. Trump wants his enemies prosecuted and persecuted, but prosecuted. He's called on judges who have had the temerity to rule against him to be impeached. He has blacklisted law firms because they work with Democrats or their partners are Democrats. He gave a speech at the Department of Justice, and no one has heard such a speech spoken inside the Justice Department ever. And this is what he said. He said his enemies were, quote, scum, that the cases brought against him were, quote, bullshit, that the judges who ruled against him were corrupt, that his prosecutors were deranged, and that those who came after him should be imprisoned. For his war against the nation's most prestigious universities, Trump is demanding that leftist woke elitism be expunged, or else research dollars and tax-free status will be eliminated. Trump continues to target the media as the enemy of the people. The Associated Press has been excluded from presidential events. The Voice of America has been shut down. Trump has asked the regulator to cancel the broadcast license of CBS. Trump is moving to defund public media's public broadcasting service and National Public Radio. So where are the Democrats? They're adrift. Without control of the House or the Senate, Trump dominates everything in the Capitol. I think it's something like 70% of Republicans in the House have been elected since 2016, so all they know is Trump. Trump controls the Republicans control Congress, and it's completely dominating. The real tragedy for the Democrats, aside from losing the presidency, that's pretty important stuff, is that they did not keep control of the House of Representatives. And when you don't have control of the House, you don't have control. What the House committees have is jurisdiction over all aspects of the government. Two things. If Democrats control the House of Representatives and they don't like Trump legislation, they will not pass it. But in terms of just day-to-day oversight of the government and what it's doing, it's a completely different deal if the Republicans with Trump control it or the Democrats. So there are no hearings on all these things. There are no investigations. There's no legislation that they introduce that they can bring to the floor of the House for a vote. Trump wants to do this, well, we want to do that. And they pass it and send it to the Senate. But the other infirmity in this situation is that we don't have, in the United States, it's a constitutional system, it's not a Westminster system. There is no leader of the opposition. So here, even if you have only 20 seats under Peter Dutton's control in the parliament, he has many, many more seats, but let's say he only had 20. On any given day, the press goes to the prime minister, and the prime minister says, I want to do this. Then they go dutifully to the leader of the opposition, say, what do you think? And the leader of the opposition gets a little airtime to say things. And the Democrats have not figured out a fix to that infirmity. There should be someone authoritative standing up every morning at 10 a.m. on the Democratic side and saying, here are the 5 atrocities that the president has committed since the sun came up this morning, and this is what we're going to do about it, and this is what we stand for. That's not happening. So you have a vacuum in Washington for all the people in the voters who don't like Trump and don't want him and find what he's done just terrible. There's no critical mass, no center of gravity in Washington. We see it at the grassroots. It's beginning immediately after the election. I talked to friends across the country, and even some Republicans, and they said, how are you? Absolutely devastated, despondent, resigned. Trump won. He carried all the swing states, can't be questioned, can't believe it. It's shocking, it's horrible. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what we're going to do. And they just were flat for 3 months. And then people started getting angry when he started doing things, all the things that I've talked about. And that's growing. And so there's nothing coming out of Washington. And so that's why they think a lot of their leadership is pathetic. That's why, Bernie Sanders, will let you say what you think about Bernie, and AOC are out there, and they're getting crowds of tens of thousands of people as they go around the country. So it's bubbling up, and that is going to continue. The result is that the party has the lowest favorability it's had since the 1990s. It's just not registering in any positive territory. What I think we will see is the movement of people in the streets grow over the summer, and when that reaches a mass where the people in the streets in American cities looks like Tel Aviv on a Saturday night, that'll be when it becomes very, very significant. What happens from here? James has some history that he wanted to relate from the Nixon years, right? Yeah. I want to go back a little bit further. Let's go back to the 1930s. To me, just stepping back and looking where we are, Trump's presidency increasingly evokes the 1930s at home and abroad. Then Herbert Hoover was president. Wall Street crashed in 1929. The Depression began. Republican tariffs, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, Republican tariffs, and the Republicans, they never want to stimulate the economy with big spending. Republican tariffs and the refusal to stimulate the economy sent the country reeling. Authoritarians seized territory in Europe and Asia. And that was the 1930s, and we know how that decade ended. But America's voters began to fight back. November 1932. It was an election, in 1932, Franklin Roosevelt was on the ballot for president, and the elections for Congress occurred at the same time, of course. In the November 1932 election, because of everything that was going on, not so much on foreign policy, that had not matured yet, but just on what was happening at home with the Depression and everything, the terrible waste of society. In November 1932 election, the Republicans were run out of town. They lost 100 seats in the House and 12 seats in the Senate. And the Democrats took over. And the U.S. ultimately was saved by Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. and ultimately the defeat of fascism. I'm going to wind up very soon, very soon. I'm going to yield more time to James. So the movement that I talked about is growing. And my conclusion from that is, if we are on something parallel to the 1930s, is that if all that Trump has spawned comes into full force but does not deliver the miracle that he promised, instead of what he promised, that you have recession, inflation, chaos across the land, the midterm elections next year could be a turning point as it was in 1932. So the Democrats could be in striking distance. If so, Trump's power will be checked by the Democrats, at least in the House of Representatives. And that means that Trump's golden age will die before its birth.
You've both spoken about executive orders. Now, just briefly explain, can you run the United States in the next 2 years, say, or maybe the next 4 years, on executive orders alone? I mean, what's the comeback against executive orders? Is it in the Congress, or is it in the courts, or does it not exist?
You have to pass laws to make things happen. So Trump wants tax cuts. His tax cuts expire. The ones that he had passed in 2018, they expire. They have to be extended by law. He wants to cut budgets from things, even though he's doing a lot through Doge. You still need to do that. And he also wants and the members of Congress want efficiency, spending reductions in order to cover all this other stuff. So you cannot govern the country solely by executive order.
Bruce is right.
I'm actually left, but that's okay.
Okay, so there's a question here.
In a recent vote in United Nations, the United States voted alongside North Korea, Russia, Iran, Belarus, Venezuela, and Cuba against
and Israel.
And Israel, yes, as a resolution condemning Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And even China abstained. Does this not indicate that the Trump administration objectively is on the side of Russia? And the slogan could be, "Make Russia great again."
I'm not familiar with that particular resolution, but I think that that's a bit of an extreme thing to say. I don't think Trump is on the side of Russia at all. I know that this has become a very popular thing to say, and it's been a popular thing to say since Hillary Clinton crashed out in 2016, and they decided, oh, well, we can't blame Robbie Mook's data harvesting system and all of that, so therefore we have to blame somebody. I know, it's Russia. And it's been like that ever since. Frankly, I don't, I'll be really honest, I'm not sure taking seriously anything that happens in the UN these days is a particularly profitable thing to do.
I thought the reaction here was really significant when you have the Prime Minister and the opposition leader saying, we're with Ukraine and we're against Russia. And we're against Russia because Russia is an aggressive country that violated every norm of international law and invaded Ukraine, and we have to oppose them. So I'm for them. I'm for where this government was.
Apart from answering my friend Mr. Carr's question, neither of you have really addressed the foreign policy issues of the Trump administration. Now, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but when Donald Trump went to the US election in November last year, he didn't mention any acquisition of Panama, Greenland, or Canada, and yet all that has been affirmed in rhetoric, if only in rhetoric. The result has been a disastrous outcome for conservatives, which Trump would align himself with, in Canada in the last 2 days. What do you think is going to be, let alone here in Australia, worldwide, the consequences of Trump being so anti?
Okay.
Thank you, Woody. Always good to see you. Look, that's a great question. The Canadian election result I find absolutely fascinating. But what's fascinating about the Canadian result is when you dive into the exit polling numbers from that and you look at the Canadian economy, The Canadian economy has grown 1.5% over the entire last decade that their liberals were, or their lefties were in power. The second lowest in the OECD. That's economically disastrous. The only group that really, really came out hard for who will stand up for Donald Trump was the over 60s. And younger demographics were very, very keen on, why can't I afford a house? Can we make Canada better? Can we make our economy better? And things like that. So the result there is a bit not quite as cut and dried as we see. I'm not sure that Poilievre brought it home, too. He did kind of waver on some other issues there. But look, there's no doubt there's going to be some small Trump effect, I think, on Peter Dutton here. But I think, it also depends on your local campaigns, your local economy. I think if Peter Dutton ran had more policies that he himself could stand up and defend and talk to, he would have a much easier time neutralizing any sort of Trump effect. As for the Panama Canal, Jimmy Carter was an idiot to give it away, and that really should strategically be with the United States.
I'm for Panama too, so it's okay. I think there's an affinity between the Canadian people and the Australian people. I think they sort of see themselves. It's much more intense in Canada because they have a 3,000-mile border, and the two economies have been completely integrated, or significantly integrated. And I think they're just offended that he thinks he can come in and make it the 51st state of the United States. I mean, I thought it was really terrific when King Charles. Starmer was in the Oval Office with the president. He had the letter from the king. Please come. And Trump loves to, please open the letter so I can show everybody. And then a British reporter asked him, he says, are you sure about this? Because what you're talking about is that you would take part of the realm of the British Empire and give it to the United States. Is that okay? How's that sound to you? And it was
for the British Empire.
It was significant. Now listen, there I am. So that's there, but what it shocked Canadians. And Carney today said it was a betrayal, and that the alliance as we knew it no longer exists, and that's pretty heavy stuff. There are two models in dealing with it. It was the Carney model or the Starmer-Albanese model, which is let's talk very seriously and try and work our way through this. So it has not gotten to a flashpoint. I mean, if Trump said, I want to make Australia the 52nd state of the United States, that would be an issue. So because I think most people in Australia are not happy with Trump, most people in Canada are not happy with Trump. So I think there has been some effect on the election here. And I think that's to be expected. But and I think it's already been priced in to where Dutton is. But Dutton was, again, for Ukraine and against the Trump tariffs. So there's strong bipartisan, so it's much more, it is substance, but it's style too.
There's a question here, then I've got a Zoom question.
Hello, thank you so much. It's been so interesting. I just wanted to say that it seems that the democratic processes have been completely ignored. So I'm just wondering, does that mean that there is still a democracy in America? And if there isn't, what do you call it?
How do you mean the democratic processes? How do you mean the democratic processes have been ignored?
In that it's run by executive orders, and there's, well, at the moment it is.
Okay.
Well, look, I would say, I think the question, hang on. Can I just sort of talk to this? Because the issue of democracy is is a really, really interesting one here. I mean, Article 2 of the Constitution provides for a great deal of executive authority, and that has been very expansive in the past and then limited by courts, and it's going to go back and forth through the courts. However, and I know Bruce is going to disagree with me, and some of you guys here are going to disagree with me, I actually think that an awful lot of what Democrats have been engaged in over the last multiple years, both during Trump 1 and Trump 2, has been about trying to deny democracy. I think that they have put their foot on the scale in so many different ways, through the lawfare and a whole bunch of other things. And I'll tell you something that Bruce said, and I'm really concerned about this. You talked about the mobilization in the streets, and the thing that I'm actually really concerned about is as we come into summer, either this summer or next summer, we get a repeat of the 2020 Summer of Love, when leftist groups used BLM, used Antifa as basically shock troops to try and shut down the nation with riots and civil insurrections and so on. I'm very concerned about that happening again. And I think that, if we look at take January 6th out of the equation, the propensity for violence on the left to annul elections that they don't like is massive, and it is historic. And I'm concerned that we are going to see another organized temper tantrum from the left that is going to be, cause an awful lot of damage, an awful lot of pain, destroy businesses, destroy downtowns. Maybe now that some of that USAID money isn't flowing through some of these NGOs, we might see less of it. I don't know.
I think the issue is the United States going to become an authoritarian? Is he an authoritarian leader? And does the democracy survive? And then I think there is the issue of demonstrations and how they unfold and so forth. But the more profound issues are, does he shut down media outlets he doesn't like? Does he jail journalists? When certain court decisions get to the Supreme Court and rule and says, thou shalt not, and he says, I shall, that has not happened in American history before. And that would be a constitutional crisis. So it's a question of getting, not just working around the norms that have governed for a long, long time, but whether he commits acts that are hostile to the Constitution and that most people understand they are hostile, and how do we live with that? Yes, I think that's...
So we're going to Parnell, then I've got a Zoom question here. Parnell?
I just wanted to take you away from the question of authoritarianism, non-authoritarianism, which seems to be repeated a lot and what everything is reduced to, and ask for a moment about economics. So, we've looking at the tariffs right now, all of a sudden the left is against tariffs, the right is pro-tariffs, to make it very simple. But it seems that there are a lot of economists making much more nuanced arguments about how tariffs work and how it might play out. Bruce, I wonder if you could reflect on why tariffs are suddenly so unpopular with the left and why that might have changed. And James, I wonder if you could sort of think about what is the argument in favour of tariffs that the right is now suddenly able to make?
Okay. It's where a difference in degree becomes a difference in kind. There are absolute tariff issues on automobiles from Europe. They should be addressed. But to slap wholesale tariffs of 10% plus 25 on steel, 25 on aluminum, and China, to try and bring it to heel for 145%, that's not intelligent use of tariffs. That is a baseball bat taken to the world and their economies and so forth, and it can plunge the world into problems. Now, on Trump's managing this, there was a quote that he had that I really liked that I wanted to find. Sorry, I can't find it, so I'll spare you. But it just is I think what Trump is doing, it's unprecedented, and everyone around the world is where he's going to plunge the world into economic hardship. And when you get to that level, no, you shouldn't go down that road.
Three things I'll just say very, very quickly to address your point, Parnell. Number one, on Bruce, what you're saying about China, frankly, given China's behavior, I'm not sure a baseball bat isn't necessarily called for. On the question of conservatives and tariffs, the right on tariffs, you have to remember that there's a long tension between, within the conservative movement in the United States, between free traders and protectionists. And, if you go back to Pat Buchanan, for example, Pat Buchanan led these arguments for a long time, and it was about the protection of the American worker. If you go back to the debates around NAFTA, when NAFTA was put forth in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, there was a big argument about what's going to happen to American manufacturing communities if you add in a country like Mexico with low wage and low worker protections to compete against a country like the United States with higher wages and higher worker protections and things like that. So that actually goes partially the way to do it. On steel and aluminium, Donald Trump is very, very clear that there's a national security argument around this as well. And the argument is that if push comes to shove and you get into a real shooting war with a major power like China, you need to be able to build ships, you need to be able to build missiles, you need to be able to make guns, you need to make tanks, or do whatever it is that you need to make. And so from that point of view, they see protecting American material industry as a real national security thing.
No, I think
Hold on, Gerard.
gotta
You,
be
you think
brief.
you think that Australia would withhold steel and aluminum if China was attacking the United States?
Well, no, I don't think we would. I'm not sure that we make enough of it, and it's an awful long way away and can be cut off pretty quickly by China when you've got ships circling the country and firing off, guns and so on. And a Virgin pilot, we love our Virgin pilots, don't we? Is letting us know what our own Prime Minister didn't.
Bruce, I think we better...
One second, Gerard.
Yeah, one second.
One
okay,
second.
yeah.
I found that China... Yeah, I just want to read what Trump said about China and how he wants to... He's not gotten any trade deals. China also wants to make a deal badly, but they do not know how to get it started. We are waiting for their call. It will happen. You trust this to bring about a new world trading order that's sensible?
Okay, now we're going to move on. I'm losing control of this. And don't ask the audience questions because they tend to answer. Yeah. So Dimitri Bernstein says he wants to make the point that Dimitri reckons that on average Roosevelt, that's FDR, averaged 300 a year in terms of executive orders. So there you are, we can check that out. But his question goes back to business, coming from Parnell, who's on the economy. From the first 100 days, what can business in Australia learn about the fundamental rethink of our defence? Is it business as usual or a fundamental rethink of our defence required in view of the Trump foreign policy so far after 100 days?
Okay, on the first question, there were 300 laws passed. There are laws passed by Congress in the first 100 days, not executive orders in the first 100 days.
Did he say executive orders or?
No, he said how many laws?
Laws, okay, all right. Anyway, the defense question
Well,
is...
actually, he says executive order, so there you go.
All right, well, let's take that on notice, and we'll fact-check that, and we'll let everybody know here after the show. That said, though, the defense story is one that Trump, with or without Trump, if Kamala Harris had won, I would be saying the exact same thing, which says that Australia desperately needs to arm up for the next conflict, and that involves drones, that involves a lot of naval technology. We know what the arena is going to look like. We see one of the fascinating things right now, just to go off on a slight 15-second tangent, is that the two conflicts we see playing out right now in the Red Sea with the Houthis and in Ukraine right now, they give us a very good idea of what future warfare is going to look like, and we should be planning for that and not trying to fight in the deserts in the Middle East or the jungles of Vietnam. It's going to be a different thing. We know what it looks like, and it's asymmetric, and we need to be able to fight that sort of asymmetric warfare. And my answer would be exactly the same thing if Kamala Harris was president right now.
Okay, so we've got to finish. This might be the last question. Mark?
Bruce, you referred to the polls and the outrage that's being expressed in the polls. Where were the people now expressing outrage? Where were they at the time of the November election?
They were not voting for Kamala Harris. Hold on. First of all, Trump did not win a majority of the popular vote. He came just short, 49.8. He gained 3 million votes from 2020. Harris lost 7 million votes that Biden had in 2020. That's the difference in the election.
Have the Democrats learned anything from this? Are they aware of the vast numbers of people who are totally fed up with Hollywood, the wealthy, the same in Australia, their hypocrisy, the change in the language, the propaganda that's going on in schools and universities, which has all come from that side of politics. Okay. Have they learnt anything?
Okay, the Democrats, and then we'll finish with that.
We will see. Your point is right, and we will see whether they have learned it. They have to learn it. Let me say this. Reagan comes in, the Reagan Revolution, elected in 1980. It took 12 years for the Democrats to come together around Bill Clinton to elect a president who was worthy of 2 terms. And so it could be 12 years before the Democrats come back.
Can I just say one sort of final thing on that? One of the things my entire life has been that the Republican president has always been called Hitler. I'm old enough to remember when I was a small boy, Reagan was Hitler, and he was a madman who was going to get us into a nuclear war. I just feel like, you mentioned Hollywood, I've seen this movie before.
You got it. We didn't call him Hitler. We just said Adolf.
So I just said we had a great night tonight. We had 2 great speakers. The papers will be published, be up on our website. And I just want to say thanks to James and thanks to Bruce for a great night.